I am not sympathetic to Disney Star Wars in the slightest. I've gone on and on about how they butcher the source material George Lucas made by changing the universe to suit them, misrepresenting characters, getting the most ignorant non-Star Wars fans to make movies or shows, and other stuff like not even resembling Star Wars. Well, here, I'm going to list off the stuff I actually like about Disney Star Wars. This list will be incredibly generalized. If I find something consistently enjoyable, or it's something big enough to note down, I'll talk about it. Something I was going to put on the list as a starting point, but now won't because they fucking ruined it, is releasing audiobooks for Star Wars Legends books. They've cancelled the audiobooks now, presumably because they don't want the fanbase to be too educated about the older, better content. So that was some easy praise they've now lost. At least I can say the audiobooks they did do were very high quality and not lazily done in the slightest. They've re-released Legends books at a snail's pace, but at least they were kind of doing it until recently. So the only thing I can praise was the production values of the audiobooks they did do. With that out of the way, I want to go through specific categories and talk about them. The first obvious thing I liked was the dynamic between Finn and Poe, as well as the chemistry between the respective actors. I much disliked how their relationship started, as Poe was literally the one who killed Finn's stormtrooper buddy at the start of The Force Awakens, and Finn decides to help him for some reason. Anyways, once they started interacting on screen, the movie was at its most enjoyable. Again, whenever they get something right, they have to fuck it up eventually. Because come The Last Jedi, Poe and Finn's interactions are mitigated when they introduce Rose Tarko, which is another reason I dislike Rose. Canto Bight probably would have been 10 times better if we had our lethal weapon duo go there instead of replacing Poe with Rose. I even talked about this briefly in my now outdated Last Jedi review. Side note, my mainstream film reviews are all outdated. I should probably redo them at some point. If there was anything else I liked about the sequels, I like how the Force Awakens novelization actually explained some important things and was better than the movie, but that might count as cheating. So what else did I like about the sequel movies? BB-8 being derivative off of R2-D2 concept art was pretty good, but BB-8 should have just been a background character. They should have had R2 take the pivotal role. It would have made more sense to just have R2, because after all, a Star Wars saga film is supposed to have him and 3PO stick around for a lot of important moments. I suppose I also liked a few lines out of context. I commonly use a good question, for another time, as a common line in my reviews. My favourite line in the sequels would have to be,
"It's another Death Star."
Because the film is at least acknowledging its unoriginality in that moment. Although probably not, since Poe responds to this random character by comparing the Death Star to Starkiller Base and trying to make a shitty point about how size makes it different. The least hateable major character in my opinion might actually be Poe. I say this because aside from his antics in The Last Jedi, and the plot hole of why he left Jakku instead of looking for BB-8 at a top priority, he didn't do that much bad stuff. I suppose when it comes to new casting choices, Oscar Isaac didn't annoy me as much as the others. I think the character was completely wasted, and given JJ had him survive at the last minute when writing The Force Awakens, I can't really say much else that's positive. General Pride was a thrown-in character, but he was competent. That's all I can say about him. Mark Hamill did a great job playing the wrong character, so there's that too. Playing a character who wasn't supposed to be Luke Skywalker probably would have resulted in more acknowledgement of his great performance. Despite the soundtrack being vastly inferior, I thought some of the score suited certain scenes, like Starkiller Base firing on the unspecified system that was the New Republic. I like the design of Sidon Athano, I guess. Something that kind of resembles Star Wars at the very least. Lando, despite being really fan-servicey, was probably the best legacy character utilized. I'll also say that Traitor was a meme that deserved to be popular. Despite the Jedi voices in The Rise of Skywalker making no sense, they're pretty good out of context. I kinda like how they at least acknowledged the prequel trilogy in The Last Jedi, even if Rian Johnson didn't understand a thing that happened in them. Chewbacca's fake-out death when it happened was actually convincingly done, as well as 3PO's memory wipe, I guess. I had to think really hard about this to find some things I liked. There's probably some other stuff that hasn't come to mind yet, so maybe I'll discuss it in the comments as someone asks me about something really specific. With that being said, let's talk about other aspects. I respect that they actually used George Lucas's input and tried to bridge two trilogies together. That's some big brownie points right off the bat. The hallway scene was mostly excellent, with the only problem being why Vader didn't grab the Death Star plans when slaughtering the rebels. Rogue One was a good movie ruined by Kathleen Kennedy's meddling, but it at least deserves to be acknowledged. In terms of other stuff, I thought shedding some light on morality in the Galactic Civil War was a nice touch. Andor was not a very well-behaved rebel. K2SO was a decent character. Krennic was a decent villain. My favourite scene ironically had to be the scene where Krennic lines up the Death Star engineers and is about to execute them until Galen steps in the way to try and save them, only for Krennic to kill them anyways. I suppose the scene was really tense, and I wish the rest of the movie had efficient momentum and pacing like that. Scarif was a nice planet, and made in-universe sense to have the Death Star plans be there. Bail Organa was a nice addition to the film as a cameo. I also like how Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor just hugged at the end of the movie, and didn't have some bullshit romance with each other before they died. The movie was suitably dark, and had an excellent takeaway about how not everyone in the rebellion who died for the cause would be remembered. Rogue One is probably the only movie that deserved positive reviews, and despite not executing its story the best, it's a far cry in quality compared to most of everything else they did. I like Donald Glover as Lando. He could replicate the persona the best out of anyone I could think of, and despite having shit material to work with, he held his own. Aside from that, I didn't like much of the other actors. Alden Ehrenreich was completely miscast. Trying to think extra hard, Chewbacca managed to be an okay character in this movie. I generally didn't like the movie, and it's a story that should have just been a fucking novel, like what the Expanded Universe did. The whole thing was ruined by Kathleen Kennedy, so any further enjoyment I could have gotten was ruined by her. First, the Clone Wars. The one thing that was consistently enjoyable were the droid characters and their dialogue. The same also applies to the Bad Batch as far as I've seen. On top of that, the only arc that held up was the Reiko Hardeen one. I kinda liked how each episode started, with a charismatic narrator highlighting events, although they could have mapped out the war and where it was going, and not have the Republic win every single time. Hondo Inaka was a great supporting character. Anything else to my memory would be very specific to a certain moment in a certain episode, and you might as well watch my complete review series to hear that. So let's move on to Resistance. I liked nothing. I'm going to save my positive thoughts on Rebels for my review series. Now for the Mandoverse. I like the actors they got for the Mandalorian's main cast. Pedro Pascal plays a convincing Mandalorian. Carl Weathers was ripped straight from the Rocky movies, it seems, but he was a solid actor. I also liked Moff Gideon's actor. I thought the character itself was really stupid, committing one of my most hated tropes in the worst way possible. I suppose I liked how he claimed the Darksaber and was the one who genocided Mandalore, but that was about it. The guest stars they got in seasons 1 and 2 were pretty good. For example, they got Michael Biehn, who was Carl Reese in The Terminator, and that was a welcome guest star. I like how they respected Luke's character, but that should be the bare minimum. In the Book of Boba Fett, I liked how Mando's new ship was the Naboo Starfighter, and that's the only thing I liked about Book of Boba Fett. As for my thoughts on Season 3, you'll have to wait for that. The main consistently enjoyable thing about all the Disney-era video games was that they had gorgeous graphics. In terms of more specific stuff, the only thing I consistently liked about the Battlefront 2 campaign was Shriv, and the writing for legacy characters. And Luke's conversation with Del is completely authentic. Some of the set pieces had nice ideas to them, but that was about it. As for the game's multiplayer, I liked how they improved the game with updates, but unfortunately, I never got to extensively play the game when it improved massively, so I can't comment much. As for Fallen Order, it didn't break canon. It was a fun Jedi adventure story. It had representation without straight up wokeness, and it didn't have any Disney bullshit, and it actually made me want more. Plus, the cameos and guest appearances were pretty well utilized. I suck at the combat, but that's my fault rather than the game's fault. It was a simple, straight to the point, Jedi adventure game without any bullshit. Overrated, but still good. When it comes to Squadrons, it's not my type of game, so I can't really comment. Since there's been a piss poor rollout of games as of now, that's all I can say. I liked Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen. I liked the flashback scene aside from the fact that they forgot to de-age the actors. And I liked Tamara Morrison's cameo as a clone trooper. That's it. The rest of the show was horrible. I found Andor to be dull and boring as shit, but hey, they didn't break continuity as far as I could tell. The pacing should have been better, and the show should have tried to resemble Star Wars at the very least, and I suppose the breakout scene with Kino Loy was decent, but aside from that, the show was completely uninteresting. Andor is nowhere close to being peak Star Wars. Believe me, there's better stuff pre-2012 you could be experiencing. Most of the books and comics I've read were pretty bad. Jedi Battle Scars was dog shit, Aftermath was terrible, Inferno Squad was plain forgettable, Bloodline was meh, and I couldn't even get into the Thrawn novel when I tried reading that. Aside from what I've read of the comics, I suppose I liked the artwork. The cliffhangers to the main line and Darth Vader comics were decent, I guess, but I haven't read much of the comics, and they are open to retconning from what I've seen. I like how they at least got the prequel actors involved with Star Wars again, like Hayden Christensen, Ewan McGregor and Ahmed Best. That was nice. I also liked how they're not dumb enough to retcon the sequel trilogy. And that's my semi-complete list. I tried my hardest to come up with stuff I liked, and it wasn't that long. Disney have mostly done wrong with Star Wars, and don't even do a lot of common sense things that would easily improve their reputation, like letting the expanded universe authors continue their work separate from Disney canon. They could also try to have a little more variety and not copy-paste the old stuff over and over again. They could also consult the Lucasfilm story team more. Why even is there a Lucasfilm story team nowadays? They could also consult George Lucas more. These shouldn't even have to be constructive points. They should be no-duh things. But Disney as a corporate entity does the exact opposite of what's logical. They don't even properly understand how to milk the most money out of people half the time. Well, that's my takes on the stuff I did like. I'm JJ Plagiarisms. And until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes? Under the mountain.